Hi, welcome to Your Urban Connection. And remember, this is the channel that is often imitated, but is never duplicated. And today I'm honored to have as my special guest on this show, a candidate for mayor. And some of you know her and some of you don't, but I hope that through this 1 hour program we have, many of you will get to know her like I do, and you'll, I'm sure, come to the conclusion that this is a candidate that you can get behind and support for this primary election. Now, remember, there are about 7 people that are remaining candidates. Only 2 of those people will advance to the general election. So you want to make sure that you vote in the primary to make sure and ensure that the candidate you support does make the general election. Only 2 will advance, okay? So welcome to my show, candidate Celeste Racette. Welcome to the show, Ms. Racette.
Thank you, Mr. Barfield. It's an honor and a privilege to be on your show. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Now, what I would like for you to do is, I know this is your first time, I believe, running for office, elected office, but you was raised up in the political arena as your dad was a former city commissioner. And I think he served 1 term as mayor. Is that correct?
That's correct. 1964 to 65. Yep.
Okay, so you know what this game is all about. Okay. So what I'd like for you to do, ma'am, is just introduce yourself and tell my viewing audience why you decided to make this run for mayor.
Sure. Thank you for the question too. So
Sure.
I grew up in a house that was very welcoming to everybody in the community. And my father was a great role model in that he had discussions with people throughout the great city of Wichita from all walks of life, from every neighborhood. And he worked with people to do things that I think were very forward thinking for Wichita. They had the vote on the bond issue for Century 2 in the public library. They did the Cheney water conduit. They started WSU as a state university. They did so many positive things for Wichita. So I had a great role model. And when I had children and was married, that's another thing I did and impressed upon my children is giving back to the community. Service is not a hollow word to me. Service is something that I remember distinctly from President Kennedy, and ask not what you know, his famous quote. And so service has always been a part of our background. And looking at Wichita, I've been dismayed, having been born and raised here, to see so many business deals that are lopsided, that don't benefit the city, that don't do things that help the city, but instead line the pockets of wealthy developers. And that's not what service is all about, right? And that's when I started to get dismayed and upset and disappointed in our leadership and decided to run.
Okay. Now you mentioned your dad was instrumental in the implementation of the Century 2 facility. So that is something that has been near and dear to your heart, I guess, ever since you were a youngster. And was that your main reason for getting involved in the Save the Century 2?
Well, the main reason I got involved in Save Century 2 is that they kicked me out of the meeting. And I was stunned that I was excited about this Riverfront Master Legacy Plan and went to the first public meeting. And yes, I had artifacts from my late father's papers that I had on an empty table in front of me. But what started me down this path is that this lady came in front of me and pointed her finger at me and ordered me out of the building. And I was stunned. I was sitting at an empty table. And I said, "Isn't this a public meeting?" And she said, "No, this is a private meeting and we paid for it." And I realized in looking around that this was a done deal and that citizens weren't part of the discussion at all. And when she told me to leave the building and my husband was sitting quietly behind me reading his iPad, we gathered up and started to walk out. And Diane Leffler, who's a Wichita Eagle reporter, was coming down the stairs at that moment and saw her ordering me to leave. And it was his article in the Wichita Eagle the next day that caused my phone to ring and people to call me and say, I'm horrified they kicked you out of that building. How can I help? And that was when the Save Century 2 movement or effort began, was other people dismayed that I had been ordered out of that meeting and realizing that this is something we are being forced down our throats, ramrodded through to do this $1.2 billion development. So it was the great people of Wichita who saw a wrong, I guess, and knew that this was not an open and fair discussion and decided to help create the Save Century 2 movement.
Okay, and in that movement, and I'll refer to it as you do as a movement, how many people actually became involved with you in that movement?
So that's pretty amazing, right? 17,265 people signed our petition asking for the right to vote on what happened to Century 2. And this was during the height of COVID. So they would drive by the office and we'd come out with the petition, or we would open the office and they'd come in late at night or whenever, or we'd walk through some neighborhoods with masks. I mean, we were careful about health safety guards, but they wanted to sign the petition and they willingly put their name, address, and information on that petition as a registered voter to have a voice. That's pretty incredible, don't you think? 17,265 people would get me elected as mayor.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. That's an incredible amount of people.
Well, and what year was that you started that?
We started that, I remember the date very clearly. I was kicked out of the boathouse July 31st of 2019 because I drove that night to Denver, Colorado. And the next day, my first granddaughter was born and stayed in the NICU. And I was there to help take care of the family.
Okay.
So,
now, correct me if I'm wrong, but now that was your first involvement, or was it not, in getting you involved in the conduct and the activities of the Wichita City Council?
absolutely. I had been working as a single mom up to that point and had just recently got remarried to my second husband and had no clue, didn't pay attention to city council, was traveling and flying with the FDIC throughout several states, had no idea what they were doing. That really opened my eyes with a hard kick.
Okay. Okay. Now, when I say that you're familiar with the ongoings and the workings of the city council, you are known for, and excuse the word, for lack of a better term, being a financial watchdog over the city council and the city's spending of taxpayers' dollars. And along the way, you have found some interesting waste of taxpayers' dollars, some, as you related to earlier, some favoritism favoring certain special interest groups that were unfair to the taxpayers and the voting public. And you found several instances where taxpayers' dollars were being misappropriated. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and that's actually been very dismaying. I've been very disappointed, but after I was kicked out of the meeting, I turned my attention as a retired fraud investigator to looking at city finances. I started thinking, this is a red flag that there's something already going on in the background to approve this deal. And citizens really aren't important. This was just, you know, a brilliant flash in the pan. We were supposed to be sold on it. So I started looking and saying, what is going on really here? And in looking at the city finances, I found, for example, the Wichita Ice Center was privately managed by the Genesis Gym owners. That's Rodney Stephen. And I looked at this deal we had done for them to manage the Wichita Ice Center and found out, filed a Freedom of Information, that we gave him $750,000 to improve the Wichita Ice Center. And over the period of 10 years, only one loan payment had been made towards that loan. And in 10 years, do you think we took him into default, or we kicked him out of the building, or we went back against his personal guarantee to make him pony up on that loan. No, we ignored the fact he wasn't paying on the loan, and he was allowed to stay in the building and run the building down. There were broken scoreboards. The place was a mess. And after I talked about this with Wichita Ice Center folks, at the end of the contract, they got a new management team. But when he moved out last year, he ripped the carpet off the floor. He tore the lockers off the locker room. He tore the doors off the locker rooms. He ripped the monitors out of the wall and left holes in the drywall. And he even took the soap dispensers out of the bathrooms. Why would no one at City Hall, when he's evacuating the Genesis gyms, would they go there and make sure he didn't destroy the building? There's now a lawsuit, and the city's trying to sue to collect. It's over $1 million now with unpaid interest. And his countersuit says, the city never expected me to pay back that loan. That's why I only made one loan repayment. And you know what? He's made campaign contributions to several city council members. And I started to see a pattern here. I also discovered that Ruffin, who owns and bought the Hyatt Hotel from the city, has a special sweetheart deal. And he gets to scrape the revenue out of Century 2 for two things: meeting room income and food and beverage service. Why does he get this sweetheart deal to take revenue from taxpayers out of Century 2 into his own pockets? And he recently bought more public land to do a second Hyatt Hotel downtown. And I went before the park board and said, please, before you sell him more of our public land, let's renegotiate this sweetheart deal where he takes revenue out of Century 2 for his own businesses. You know what? They ignored me. They gave him the land. He still has that sweetheart deal to scrape revenue out of Century 2. Another big deal I discovered in looking at the finances is I saw this real mysterious debt bond schedule that was paid for out of the hotel guest tax. And when we booked this, and by that booked, I mean when we recorded it in our financial statements, the bond debt was recorded as storm water utilities. And what's really interesting about this debt is I had a conversation with the finance director and I said, why is the hotel guest tax, which is supposed to take care of Century 2 and our cultural arts facilities like the African American Museum, the Native American Museum, the Wichita Art Museum, the Aviation Museum, why are we using the hotel guest tax for stormwater utilities? And he quietly answered me and said, it's for a hotel, a private hotel. And I was stunned. He said it was for Jim Corrick's Water Walk Fairfield Inn. We gave him a $4 million handout, scraped money that was supposed to take care of these cultural institutions to give to a wealthy developer to help him build his own private hotel. And taxpayers now are on the hook for that debt. And it was mislabeled as stormwater utilities when really it should have said Jim Corrick's Fairfield Inn. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what I've found that's mislabeled, misidentified. There is no way taxpayers could look at financial statements and truly have an idea of where their money's being spent. And that's pretty sad.
Now, let me go back, first of all, to the ice rink. Now, if I'm understanding you correctly, once the city sued Mr. Stevens countersued and made the statement that the city never expected him to repay that loan. So then my question would be, then why did he make the first payment?
That's a good question. Maybe he was trying to sort of say, I may or may not pay this back, but you're not going to be mad at me because I'm supporting your campaign. So you look the other way and I'll do what I want to do. And merrily down the road they went until I spoke up with the Wichita Ice Center folks who had started a petition. And I think I truly get up there and embarrass city council over what they've done.
Well, you know, this is the thing. And this has been going on for, I'm a native Wichita myself. And I've seen this over and over and over. These special sweetheart deals that are made to only a certain group of people, a certain group of individuals. And they're deals that you and I could never, ever be the beneficiary of. And you have seen, as I have, and I will say, you don't have to agree with me on this, and you don't have to say this because, you know, you're running for office, but certain members of the city council in the past have been under the thumb of certain individuals from these special interest groups in this city. Okay, now the public doesn't have any idea, and this is one of the reasons why I always tell people that basically, if you want to find out who to vote for and who not to vote for, your best gauge is to look at the campaign finance reports, because normally you will find out who is being controlled by these certain groups. And it's the same group of people over and over and time again. Now, I want to talk about one other thing that I think you uncovered. You went to this new ballpark, and I think you bought a beer. How much you pay for that beer?
$16. $16. My husband was just stunned when I charged that beer and looked at the sales receipt.
And that was for what, a 12-ounce can of beer?
Yes. Now, so the story behind that is the new ball stadium is another sort of fiasco the city's done with no voter input, right? We didn't vote on it, didn't have a say. It was done with an emergency ordinance where they moved really quick. And the bidding on the job was a special kind of bidding called design build. So once they had the contractor in place, the contractor then could select the subs to very quickly up it went and down went Lawrence Dumont. And when the stadium was built, my husband loves baseball. He used to go to Lawrence Dumont. So to keep me happy, he'd give me his charge card and I would get, you know, something, ice cream sandwich, whatever. And I got a beer. And the receipt so stunned me that I looked at it and I saw that first there was a 2% CID tax for the CID bonds that built the stadium. Then there was a 7.5% tax for the state sales tax on that purchase. But then there was an 8% ball development fee on the receipt that was unknown to me what that was. There was no sign telling me there was this ball hidden development fee. And I took that receipt to city council and held it up and said, why are you allowing the ball stadium to charge 18% tax on everything within the ball stadium? And there's no signs posted warning the consumers that when they buy something like a t-shirt, when they go to pay for it, there's going to be this hidden surcharge of this 8% development fee. That does not seem right. That's why our attendance was falling off at that point, because it was so expensive. And city council, they look at me like goldfish in a bowl and go, I don't think we can do anything. It is our ball stadium, but we don't manage it. So there's not much we can do. So you know what I did? I went to the district attorney's office with copies of my receipts and filed a complaint and stated that there was no warning, no labels, that this was illegal surcharging of prices on everything in the ball stadium. And you know what? They agreed with me and they made them stop charging this fee. And last December, they asked me if I would be okay if 6 charities received the refund, because how would you find this odds amount that were due everybody who had bought anything? So they said, you approve giving $10,500 to 6 charities for Christmas. And I was like, are you kidding? Of course I would approve this refund. And one of the charities, Touch Closet, which gives clothes to school children who need shoes or t-shirts, sent me the most heartwarming text and said, thank you so much. Because of your work, we got this refund, this charitable donation to help kids at Christmas.
And so therefore, we have to thank thousands of people before you had paid $16 for a 12-ounce can of beer, which they could have gone less than a block from the stadium to a local bar and paid probably what, $3
Probably, depending
or
on,
less?
yes,
You know,
yeah,
okay. So these are the kinds of things that the city hopes nobody ever finds out about. These are the clauses they hope you never see because they don't put those in the contract. Okay. So they can escape that oversight. But you, with your background, okay, and your knowledge, you knew where to look and what to look for, and you then were responsible for $60,000 of overcharged beer fees being returned to the community in the form of 6 nonprofit agencies. Good for you. Good for you. That's what we need. That's what
thank,
we need in the mayor. That's what we need in the city council. We need oversight. Okay. And we need transparency. And
agreed.
that is why that I'm counting on you. And let me just be honest and transparent. I am supporting you in your bid for mayor. I want
Thank
to be
you.
transparent about that.
Thank-
Okay. But ma'am, you are exactly the kind of person that we so badly need on that city council bench to be the voice of reason, to be the voice for taxpayers, to be the watchdog for taxpayers' dollars. Okay? Because these guys have been getting away with these things and not having any answers. But the bad part is that after they give away taxpayers' dollars for these favorite sweetheart deals and frivolous developer deals, they don't have any money to fix our sidewalks. They don't have any money to fix our streets. They don't have any money to do anything about the homeless population. They don't have any money to do anything about the housing situation that we find ourselves in. That's the bad part. So it's always no to the working class, but it's always yes to the special interest groups. That's what I find to be a problem. So, like I said, I hope that people through this broadcast will find that there's 7 people running, but there's only one candidate that is truly committed to working for the people, to looking out for our financial situation. We find right now, ma'am, we've got, we're talking about public safety. We're looking at probably 100 positions that are unfulfilled in our police department. Crime is running rampant. We're having problems with shooting incidents. I was saddened to wake up about a week and a half ago and find us on the national news media compared in the same same paragraph or same sentence as Baltimore, Maryland. We're no Baltimore, Maryland. We're no Chicago. We're no Philadelphia. We're Wichita, Kansas. Okay, we're better than that, and we can do better. But for some reason or other, we're not seeing that, and we're letting ourselves come under control, or not under control, with the crime, with the shootings. And I want to tell you, this Second Amendment, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the major causes. When you start passing laws like you don't need a permit to carry a gun, you don't need any training, you don't need anything, just pay a fee. And anybody can carry a gun unconcealed. They can carry it on the hip. What do you expect? You can expect more suicides. You can expect more accidental shooting. You can expect more, what would I say? When you have a road rage, more road rage incidents that used to be settled by a finger or a word or two, now settled by gunfire.
Right.
I mean, we've got to find some solutions. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, from what I'm seeing, nobody on the council, nobody at City Hall has an answer or a solution to this problem.
Yeah.
And these are the things that we have to work on.
Exactly.
I'm getting all these mailings, and I see these people talking, and I'm looking at a couple here right now. And I don't see anybody talking about our streets, our sidewalks. They're talking about our bridges. I don't see anybody talking about any of those things. I don't see anybody talking about our homeless situation. I don't see anybody talking about our housing situation. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about, because I just noticed you just in the last few days, that the city is now talking about spending another $100,000 to abandon, to bulldoze and demolish certain homes that they consider undesirable, with no plans to rebuild or do anything to solve the problem that we have with unaffordable housing in Wichita.
Right. And so the city currently owns about 240 properties, and they've held them for over a year. So my question there is, why are we holding on to vacant lots or abandoned houses if we're not turning them over to people and letting them bid and buy them? And I'm not talking about commercial developers who might want to tear them down and build apartment complexes and move out of state. I'm talking about let working class families have a chance to buy properties that the city owns, and let's move ahead with the affordable housing program they've supposedly designed. There's supposed to be ARPA funds designated for helping with affordable housing, and we haven't spent any of it yet. So I'm not sure what's going on in the city, that there's this log jam and taking these houses they own and these properties they own and getting them into the community. Now, I do know that when it comes to giving developers handouts for expensive homes, it's the opposite side of the situation. Like Riverside, there are some developers that were given handouts to do infrastructure in the Riverside area and build $400,000 homes. And we gave them a handout for the streets and the roads to build that housing development and turned it into a TIF. TIFs are supposed to be for blighted areas. Why are we giving wealthy homes in Riverside TIF money? They should have done special assessments and passed it on to the homeowners. So this flip-flop between working class, middle class needs and wealthy developers and expensive homes, you're right, is flip-flopped, right? And we need to get going on making these houses available to people who want homes and who want to get out of paying rent to property owners. That's how you begin building equity and building wealth for yourself and your family, is through home ownership. And the flip side to that too is we've got to quit letting property taxes erode families' savings or people on fixed income, because property taxes continue to bite us in our pocket when the assessed values go up and the property tax bill goes up. We've got to get a handle on property taxes too.
And you know, you speak of TIF, Wichita does not have a good track record in having a return on investment from TIF districts. We have a terrible, terrible track record.
We do.
So, I mean, I don't understand. So let me just ask this. What's your opinion or your feeling about private / public, not public, but government / private partnerships?
Okay, so I don't know how we got off in the path we're taking, but for some reason, just like you said, the city has made terrible investment decisions in private development. Like, for example, to get the ball stadium to come to Wichita, the city decided to sell 4 acres around the ball stadium, prime riverfront land, for $1 an acre. And the ball stadium owners promised, oh, you give us this land, we're going to build a new hotel, we're going to build an office building, it's just going to really stimulate economic development. And in 4 years, what did they do? Nothing. So then city council turned around and tried to jumpstart that development by giving them more money. And they said, we'll give you $4 million in ARPA funds from the federal government to help build a sky bridge between the hotel and the office building. And I couldn't believe they were doing this. I talked and I said, you are chasing bad money with more good money going down the hole. But they didn't listen to me. And they approved this $4 million sky bridge. And what happened then? Nothing. The land is still not being developed. And then Jordan Corbett's turned around and sold the ball stadium team to a new owner, but held on to that land and still hasn't done anything. West Bank development, there was a consortium of George Laham, Jerry Jones, Dave Wells, Dave Burke. They bought that land up to Metropolitan Baptist Church and promised hotels, restaurants, retail establishments, all this great development was going to go up in the ball stadium village, they called it. What have they done in 4 years? Nothing, not a thing. And the sad part is the city doesn't write smart contracts that allows them to take back or claw back, I call it, deals they've done where they're not getting anything developed. They should be able to pull the land back, to claw back the land after a certain time period and say, you know what, you didn't do what you promised. We're taking it back and we'll put it out for bid. So I don't know why they write bad contracts, weak contracts, but another awful example is Water Walk. We sold prime riverfront land on the East Bank to Jack DeBoer with a 99-year lease. And he was going to build 5 buildings, these big towers, and all this retail space and restaurants, etc. What has he done? 1 condo and 1 Fairfield Inn hotel that got a handout. And we still have 85 years to go on that lease. Oh my gosh, that is another example of where we didn't have any business sense. We wrote a poor contract and we gave this land to a developer who was smarter than us and took advantage of us. And now we're stuck with this undeveloped land on the East Bank. So the East Bank, promises made, not kept. West Bank, promises made, not kept. Why the heck aren't we pulling that land back? Why are we making such bad business deals? So I think part of the problem is elected officials don't have a financial business background. They don't understand contracts and tough negotiations. And the other problem is I really think that City Manager Layton has unchecked power to do whatever he wants to do and make whatever deals he wants to make with the business leaders of the community. And that unchecked power has led to this imbalance of taxpayers versus business developers. And I think the problem that has developed from is that they don't want to ask questions. They don't want to appear foolish maybe, or they don't want to challenge him. And you know what? I have no problem asking questions. I have no problem challenging people. That's what I did as a fraud investigator when I had to bring down payday lenders. I stood all by myself in a bank in Timberlake, South Dakota, with a very wealthy man who had a ranch, horses, and a very lavish lifestyle. And he knew that what I was finding was going to result in him losing his payday loans throughout the United States. And he tried to bribe me. And instead, I stood firm to my principles and said, nope, I need your tax return. And we're going to bring in some higher level supervisors and your bank's going to be put under a compliance order. And he was angry, but you know what? You have to do the right thing. You have to stand up to big business when they're breaking the bank or taking advantage of people who are desperate. And for whatever reason, our city council doesn't have the backbone to challenge City Manager Layton on these crazy deals we're doing. And that's what I want to change, that environment.
Well, you know, you didn't mention the biggest boondoggle of all, and that is the stadium that taxpayers pay over $300 million for, with all kinds of promises. There were going to be all kinds of retail, there was going to be restaurants, there was going to be bars, all of that. Where is that? Where is that? Where's the oversight? Where is the accountability? There is none. And you know, I tell you, on just yesterday, and you will understand this, having worked with the federal government in banking. The OCC and another federal agency determined that Bank of America had illegally overcharged customers And they had been making obscene profits, charging $35 each for a insufficient funds check. And they made, I'm sure, billions of dollars. But they, you see, these industries do not like to be regulated. They don't like for anybody to be looking over their shoulder because they don't like to be held accountable. But this is not the first bank. This is the second bank within 90 days that the federal government has found. The first one, Wells Fargo,
Wells Fargo.
$3 billion that they had to pay in terms of federal penalties and refunds to customers who they had basically defrauded out of monies. But here's the problem. The problem is that let's just take Bank of America. Now, Bank of America has overcharged their customers because this is a national bank. Now, if they have across the country, if they have done for those $35 checks, if they have charged customers $1 billion and they get slapped on the wrist with a fine of $250,000, hey, they've still come out like a bear. I mean, they've still profited $750 million. So the reward is much bigger than the risk. Okay, so and that's what happens when you have these industries unregulated. And like I said, they don't want to be regulated. So we have the same thing here locally when we have these developers coming to the city council, feeding off the taxpayers with plans that they know are not going to be held accountable for. Okay, then they would talk about we're going to employ 1,000 people. And we find out 4 years later, they've only hired maybe 150. But nobody says anything. They're never held accountable. They're never asked to repay some of the monies that they got. It's too late, the city council will say. It's a done deal. It's gone. Well, these people, the council, and it doesn't make any difference, seems to me who's on the council. When these people come with a plan to feed off the taxpayers' dollars, they're never asked, hey, have you talked to a bank? Or have you talked to what they call it, these investors? Because you should come to us as a last resort, because these people, like you said, at the city council, they don't have the background to know what's a good plan and what's not a good plan. And so therefore, we get taken for, when I say we, I'm talking about the taxpayers. We get taken for a ride each and every time, and it never ceases to stop. Now, let me switch to another topic. And I want to ask you about this. Now, here's something that's been going on for an awful long time. And we're now, years after the fact, we're now talking about this underground water problem that we have.
Oh, okay?
My. And this thing should have been dealt with 15, 20 years ago. What's your opinion on that?
So that's a very good question. And back in 2019, I spoke in front of city council. And I talked about 2 groundwater contaminated sites. And these were the only 2 that are in documents that you and I can find. In the financial statements, I noticed there were 2 groundwater contaminated sites, and I spoke about them: North Industrial Corridor and Gilbert and Mosley. And I held up the financial statements and I said, it says here that these contaminated sites have been cleaned up. So if they're cleaned up, why aren't we testing them through KDHE and verifying that they're cleaned up and then closing them? Why are we keeping them open and rolling them forward every 10 years and keeping them open? And when I spoke to city council, they were again like goldfish in a bowl. Didn't say anything, didn't reply. And come to find out, there was a 3rd groundwater contamination site that they did not mention, that is not in the financial statements, and that is 29th and Grove. And I was horrified to find out most recently, and attended those community gatherings, that this is a 3rd contaminated site that's been known about since 1980, that there was a settlement with KDHE of $10 million, and yet it's been kept off the books. so that if anyone like me was trying to study our contaminated water, I had no idea there was this massive site that they've been drilled wells to test. 33 wells were drilled to monitor and to release the chemicals. And now come to find out, the creek where fishing has occurred, where kids have fished and people have fished, you're not supposed to eat the fish. That's another example of lack of transparency. Oh my gosh. So when I spoke recently at the last community event they had at the church, and then again at the Boys and Girls Club, I said, get this on the books. And if there's been money involved in settlement, record this amount and show how you're spending it. Use this money for cancer liver testing. Help people find out if they've been exposed, or renters have been exposed, or previous generations have been exposed. But take care of Union Railroad being responsible for this contaminated waste and make it visible. Put it on the books, make it evident. Don't bury this bad news. So I was stunned that I had spoken about that, and nobody on city council or the mayor said a word when I spoke.
Well, there's another case where, nobody wants to be held accountable. Nobody wants to be regulated. Just think about it. Whatever you do right now, it's going to cost you 10 times more money than it would have 10, 15 years ago if you'd have done what you should have done at that time. Now, I want to ask you about one other thing right quick. I find it suspicious and unacceptable that for years, the city council, dealing totally with taxpayer dollars, didn't have an ethics policy in place. What do you think about that?
That was a huge oversight. They've done so many things that are wrong. On top of not having an ethics policy, did you know there was no internal auditor that working inside the city for 3 years? And yet on the financial statements, there was this language that said our internal auditor has overseen all contracts over $150,000. And I couldn't believe it. I actually told city council, held up the financial statements and said, basically, you're lying when you say the internal auditor is looking at contracts of a certain dollar amount when there is no internal auditor. And I said that year after year after year until 3 years later, we finally have an internal auditor. And we just got an ethics policy put into place. And the first one to violate the ethics policy was the mayor who ran on ethics. So I'm just astounded. I mean, literally, I'm just astounded that we have fallen so far down the path of what's right and what's wrong. And it just astounds me.
Okay. All right. So tell me this before we conclude, Ms. Racette. Tell me, what are your top 3 priorities when you become mayor?
Okay. The first priority is to be the watchdog over taxpayer funds. I want to balance this role and even it back out so that taxpayers come back up to being a priority for how we spend money and what we do. And we give taxpayers a voice before we spend $1.2 billion or whatever we do next. So be a watchdog, which means I'll bring my accounting background and my fraud investigation skills and my FDIC bank examiner skills to make sure if we spend money, we're doing it wisely, with established returns, with tough contracts, with clawbacks if we don't meet the performance requirements. So to be a watchdog first and foremost, and not spend money foolishly like we have so often in the past. The second one is public safety, and you sort of have already addressed that, but we're short almost 100 officers, as you said, and we just lowered the standards for testing attributes for officers. And that's really bad because we're making it easier for anybody to apply to be a policeman without the safeguards on their mental facilities and perhaps some of their lack of judgment skills. That's pretty scary too. So public safety is absolutely the second concern. We've got about $5 million we can spend towards violence interruption plans using ARPA money. And we haven't even tapped that source of funds yet, but it's street violence Domestic violence is another problem in Wichita. So that's very important too. Public safety, as you've addressed. And then the third one is quality of life, which you also addressed. Our streets are a mess. When it rains, it floods here on West Street. I drive around town and it's flooding. The streets have potholes. Our bridges aren't safe. Our neighborhood pools have been closed. I hear mothers bemoaning the fact that their kids can't learn to swim in splash pads. So how are we teaching children how to swim when we close a neighborhood pool? And also park amenities. We planted flowers in Price Woodard Park, which had rusted railing, keep out signs. Joan of Arc was left in dirt and weeds. You're not going to attract families to Wichita if you go into a neighborhood and you see weeds and trash, broken streets, busted street lights. I mean, come on. We've got to take care of quality of life. So those are my three priorities: watchdog over taxpayer funds, public safety, and quality of life. Those are my three top initiatives.
Okay. Well, listen, ma'am, it's been a pleasure having you. And I hope that my audience will go and vote for you. I hope most of them will vote early, but if not early, vote August the 1st for Celeste Racette for mayor. Thank you once again for your time. I appreciate it, ma'am, and hope to have you again soon.
Thank you for having.
I'll have you back when you're mayor.
All right. Thank you so much. I respect you immensely. Thank you for having me on your program.
It's a pleasure, ma'am.
All right.
Take care.
Thank
Okay,
you.
folks, that's our show for today, and this has been another edition of Your Urban Connection. See you next time.